Hello, everyone. My name is Lyudmyla, and together with activists across the world and Bitcoiners, I have a privilege to share with you today's experience of our Building Trust coalition, BTC coalition, actually. We speak with regulators explaining why we use Bitcoin as a bank of last resort, why we cannot use traditional financial institutions. But before we start our discussion with the distinguished guests, with Andrey and Farida, I want to ask you to raise your hand. Who has experience to be terminated with a banking service in this room? Does anyone? Okay, so who is using Bitcoin as a bank of last resort by just every day? Does anyone? Okay, yeah. So now you will learn how you cannot survive without Bitcoin living every day. So first of all, Farida, we will start from you. And we know this mainstream media actually explaining us that Bitcoin is only speculation, that it's only for money laundering. But can you explain how actually in African continent it became the only tool to exclude financially people who has no access for traditional financial institutions? Mm-hmm. Can you please explain us what technologies they use?
Yeah, of course. Thank you all for being here today. Great conference so far. Thank you, Lyudmyla, for the question. The reality of the African continent, I think, is very similar to that of other parts of the world where infrastructures are not very developed and advanced. We are the continent that has the largest unbanked population in the world, literally 70%. And to citizens of countries where banking is pretty accessible and easy, the question is, why can't people just have bank account? On the continent of Africa, half of our population doesn't even have national birth certificates. Like literally, they are completely unregistered. And for you to open a bank account, you need to have an ID. And for you to have an ID, you need a birth certificate and a list of other documentation that you must provide, which are complicated for people to access and to obtain. So as a result, we have more than 70% of our people that are completely excluded from the banking system. But it goes beyond that. There are citizens who cannot access bank because of lack of documentations and lack of access to banks. But there are also citizens in some countries that are completely blacklisted by international sanctions. Countries like Somalia, for example, when some terrorist activities have taken place in certain countries, the reaction of banks is to literally block anybody from those countries, so easily opening a bank account or send money. Yet you have hundreds of millions of citizens living in those countries across the region, and they need to access money one way or another for trade, for education, for health, and many other things, and they are completely prevented from accessing those. Then you also have those who live in conflict regions. When there is war, nobody's going to keep operating their banks in situations like that. You have the situation in Tigray, in Ethiopia. You have recently the conflict in Sudan, northern Nigeria, northern Cameroon, and many other parts of the continent where citizens can no longer bank because of the conflicts and the war. And they have huge humanitarian needs, and they need to be able to respond to those with money. But even their loved ones can't even send regular remittances because everything is closed. As a result, Bitcoin becomes a solution in situations like that, and there are many other user cases for Africa. But overall, this has led to a genuine adoption on the continent. For them, it is not just about, of course, there are people who are in for, profit reasons and speculation. But then for the average person using it, it's more about survival because there are no existing and living alternatives for them. So you have people being able to support families from the diaspora through Bitcoin. You have people being able to buy trades, to buy resources and trade from one country to another, because in Africa, most countries trade, intracontinental trade is very high. Something they couldn't do before. Of course, the adoption hasn't reached the level that we want, but today Africa has the fastest adoption rate in the world. So Bitcoin can no longer exist without Africans using it.
Thank you so much. But one more question, because once we've been yesterday morning in Czech Senate, you mentioned one important aspect, that actually not every currency can be freely exchanged between the countries, and this was something shocking. Can you also elaborate how actually Bitcoin is playing crucial role. I mean, building bridges between societies also in Africa.
Absolutely. Africa has 54 countries and 46 different currencies.
Yeah.
And that means 46 different central banks. For when you take the case of my country, Togo, for example, our right neighbor on the western side is Ghana. And we are literally the same people. We speak the same languages, have the same last names and first names and everything. But we just have a colonial border that was created. So we are two separate countries. For you to send money from a bank in Togo to Ghana, the money actually goes to the central bank in France and then comes back to the UK before coming back to Ghana. So it can take up to 3 weeks.
3 weeks?
Yes, for somebody to send money through the bank transactions from Togo to Ghana. So the solution for people to access money immediately sometimes is by doing regular remittances, but they come with extremely high fees. And sometimes you can lose up to 17 to 20% of the money that you have sent as a result of that. So literally, it becomes very costly for us to not have banks that cannot communicate with each other. Yet, for our survival, our agricultural products and food and clothing, we buy them from one country to another. So how do we remove those trade barriers and make it less expensive for citizens to be able to live a decent life? So literally, those are citizens that are already facing a lot of financial constraints. GDP in our countries are really low, incomes are really low, but they are spending extra to acquire everything because banks don't communicate with one another.
Thank you. And now I move to another emergency situation, to Ukraine. And Andrey, you was on the heat of full-scale Russian aggression to Ukraine. It was in Kyiv, right?
Yes.
So tell us, please, how Bitcoin helped Ukrainians to resist against Russian military colonialism, against war crimes, how you organize as activists and just ordinary citizen, support protective equipment, medical supplies for your family, your closest associates, while traditional financial system completely paralyzed. And I want to mention that Ukrainian case is very specific because even Ukrainian government has to acknowledge and use Bitcoin to buy protective equipment because it works 24/7, right? Not like banking transaction. And when you want to save life of your relatives, your people, you have to use actually Bitcoin. You cannot rely on traditional financial system. So Andrey, please share with us your experience.
Yes, of course. Me and my family live near Kiev, near Borispol International Airport, and we were woken up at 4 a.m. On 21st of February last year by explosions in the airport. Ukraine might, I would say, is on the opposite end of Africa. Ukraine has very developed banking system and which works flawlessly when it works. You can go to supermarket, buy a card, install app on your phone, do KYC online without touching any document, and you will have a working banking card within, less than a day. It is very smooth and fast until it stopped working. Because when the war started, all terminals, card terminals in my little village just stopped to work, and everybody resorted to cash. Well, you can do cash transactions when you are dealing peer-to-peer, when you go to your grocery store. But it is impossible to pay in cash for humanitarian and humanitarian stuff to help people to evacuate and to buy medical equipment for the front line. So we had to resort to Bitcoin because it really works 24/7 and we needed help immediately. So even by official chain analysis results, only official programs raised close to $100 million. And the amount that was raised by private funds is completely unaccountable, and they still continue to raise funds and supply people.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Farida, for many people in Europe, situation with human rights and especially with financial exclusion from traditional financial institutions is completely overlooked. I mean, people just don't know what's happening there. And actually, they don't know how people in Africa trying to survive, how they resist against oppression regime. Can you share your personal experience? Because you also have quite astonishing personal story and also your activists from your countries. How Bitcoin help you in your fight for human rights and against oppressive regimes?
Thank you, Lyudmyla. It's kind of like interesting to say, but I come from Togo, I've already mentioned, and my country has been ruled by a dictatorship since 1967, making us the oldest military regime in Africa. Unfortunately, one of the records that we have is that we are the first country where a military coup took place in Africa post-independence. The reality of our country is completely intertwined with the history of money. So in 1960, my country became independent after fighting for it with the French government for many decades. There was a currency that the French government created in 1946, post-World War II, to help with the reconstruction of France by utilizing the resources of the colonies. That currency is called the CFA. It required the French government required all its colonies to maintain their gold reserves in the Bank of France. Our money is printed in France at a fee, and the French government decides on the monetary policies for our countries. The money cannot be converted into any other currency in the world. There is a 15% charge that the Bank of France takes from us whenever we have to trade. Like you want to buy something in dollars or in Chinese yen or in rupees, you have to pay the Bank of France to change your money. And as a result, it was extremely detrimental to our economies because literally we have no monetary independence. So the president of Togo then decided to introduce a bill to create the Togolese franc. It was passed by parliament and then it was ratified. A month after the bill was ratified for the creation of our currency, soldiers from the French colonial army went to his house and they killed him. And those soldiers became president of Togo. They have been ruling Togo ever since. And it has been an extremely bloody regime in a country where we have absolutely no freedom. Like we had a dictator that was so fond of himself that he made us clap for him every day when he's going to work and when he's coming back. And he made us dance for him every weekend to celebrate how lucky we had to have him. It was extreme dictatorship. No freedom of speech, no freedom of press, no freedom of association. Thousands of people are arrested and killed whenever they speak ill of the government or whenever they want change. All of that violence to be able to maintain a currency that the French government is profiting from. And it's not just the case of Togo, it's the case of all the 15 colonies that French has put under the system. A total of 200 million people living in those countries. And the land area of those countries are more than 20 times the land size of France itself. As a result, we all live in political bondage. So for us adopting Bitcoin and pushing for Bitcoin adoption, me, myself particularly, it is not just about using it as a tool to counter the CFA, but it's also a form of resistance because we really believe that our problems, our political problems, and even our economic problems, because we have a very corrupt regime that is sustained by the system, comes from the fact that we cannot enjoy monetary independence. And in addition to that, we also want to be able to organize without scrutiny, because under these regimes, the vast majority of those countries are ruled by authoritarians. Bank accounts of activists are shut down. Their assets are confiscated. The house belonging to opposition leaders are taken by the government and transformed to police stations. There's no way you can kick the police out of your house or given to military officials. There's a grave injustice happening, and there's no way for us to be able to send money easily. In fact, members of the Togolese diaspora living in the US or France or even in Ireland sent money to support the resistance movement, and when they went back home on vacation, they were arrested. Why? Because they used the traditional ways of sending, such as Western Union, and they had to go to a bank and provide the information. So the government was able to track who gave money to who and who were funding the resistance movement. So it became a risk for people to support the movement. So Bitcoin provided that privacy we needed to be able to shield people when we are raising funds and we are supporting our struggle.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, I actually remember how yesterday in Czech Parliament, parliamentarians were carefully, senators were carefully taking notes what Farida is saying, because actually one of the senators shared with us a story that he has to use cash and actually bring it with him to a country where is oppressive regime to support families of political prisoners, because there was no other way, or at least he was not aware how to send money safely. Because, you know, in all of this oppressive regime, banking data is weaponized against not only activists or family members, but also against donors. And we have examples also, for example, from Austria, not only from Czechia, when members of the parliament who wanted to support judges in Turkey just sent some, to cover some fees of lawyers. His bank account was terminated actually in Austria just because he wanted to send money to Turkey. Why? Because all of these people who are politically persecuted, they assumed to be so-called extremists, terrorists, money launderers, you can name it, because all of these regimes, they love to abuse anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism regulation. And Bitcoin became the only solution. We have another drastic example in our coalition, Fadi El Salamin from Palestine, anti-corruption activist, whose banking data, his IDs, banking transaction was published on a website controlled by terrorists. How these people receive this data from the government? Why? Into retaliation because of anti-corruption activity of Fadi. So one day, family members experienced 60 live bullets shot in their house just because his banking data and IDs were basically weaponized by the regime into retaliation. So Bitcoin became a tool how to support anti-corruption activists in many, many countries. And unfortunately, many people are unaware about it. So we ask you to spread this information and, of course, to support activity of those activists who use Bitcoin as a bank of last resort. And this is the reason why I ask you, do you use it for every day? Because we do. And it's really make change for us. Now I want to back to Andrey. Andrey, you started to fundraise with Bitcoin when and why? Can you just explain also? And can you use traditional financial fundraising instruments in Ukraine, especially in a time of emergency? How it works?
Well, I participated in first Maidan in 2004. I participated in second Maidan in 2013-14, and of course this war. And I started fundraising when the war with Russia started back in 2014. I tried to use a lot of tools. For example, I've tried to use my corporate PayPal. And after a few transactions, of course, it was shut down. So thank you, no support. And kiss your money goodbye. Therefore, I was basically forced to use Bitcoin to collect donations and distribute them to people who actually do work and give supplies to people who fight and medics, basically. And to do fundraising in fiat system legally, you have to go to state office, you have to register as NGO, you have to apply for a bank account. This would take some time. A bank account in Ukraine, it could be faster. Registration would be longer. In Europe, I guess it would be otherwise. So you might get your NGO registration, say, in Estonia quite fast. But banks usually would deny you access to create bank account, because banking is a privilege. It's not the right. So it's when you finally will be able to accept donations in fiat currency, usually it would be too late. To do it in Bitcoin, you just well, you can do it right now. If somebody would like to donate, you just give him an on-chain Bitcoin address, or if you are person to person, you just show him a Lightning invoice. You can do it with open source software within, well, okay, I am developer, it would take me 15 minutes. If you are not developer, it might take you, say, a day to boot up, say, BTC Pay server and
it's the best
web.
one. BTC Pay,
Yes,
just
of course.
one love.
to collect the donation, and you are done. You can start collect and distribute funds within hours. And when it's time of crisis, when rockets are literally flying over your house, it could be, well, it's not just could be, it is a question of life and death.
Yeah. Thank you. And actually, yes, it's a question of life and death. And we as Open Dialogue Foundation experienced it by ourselves. We were capable to fundraise for over 100 bulletproof vests and helmets, basically from the first hours of Russian full invasion to Ukraine. And we were delivering all of this protective equipment with hundreds of sets of medical equipment on the second day of the war to Ukraine. So we were delivering both to Lviv and to Kyiv, while traditional financial system was completely paralyzed. And so far, we delivered humanitarian aid over to 7 million of euro, and I'm really grateful for everyone who is supporting Ukraine right now, because unfortunately, war crime is happening every day. Farida, I want to come back to you with a question, actually, because what we discussed yesterday in a Czech Senate, I'm coming is because it's important. We are all, as human rights organizations and activists, we somehow dependent anyways on regulators, because we need to use tools which has positive reputation, right? Because it affects our donors, it affects our credibility. We ask governments to support political prisoners in our country. So it's important for us to protect Bitcoin, and it should have, and it just deserves to have really good reputation. So tell us, how was changed also perception of politicians? I mean, what was impression when they heard that basically you cannot use traditional financial instruments to fundraise? Is it accessible to use PayPal, GoFundMe, Patronate for African activists?
It is, but depending on the type of activism you're doing.
Yeah.
If you have like a project, I'm building a school in a village, or I'm building a well somewhere, I'm supporting people with food, the government doesn't feel threatened. But then if you're demanding political justice, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and you want to push for policies that provide more freedom to citizens, then you become a threat to the government. So the moment that they label you as a threat to them, automatically you are categorized as a terrorist in the country, and all your activities are censored. You can't be allowed easily to communicate on public radio, even private radio station. You can't use a regular media channel. Today, thanks to social media, it's harder for them to control that. But the control they still have is on banks. So literally, you raising money through banks is a problem. If you start a GoFundMe, of course, they are going to shut down whichever bank allows you to transfer the funds to that account. If you start a PayPal, they are going to flag it, and you're also going to have your bank account frozen and shut down. And people are even afraid to donate for such causes publicly because they are afraid that their data will be leaked, their information will be out, and they want to be private, and because it's a matter of life and death. These are regimes that can abduct you from the streets, take you, beat you up till you die. So it's not worth the risk for people to be able to take such chances. And unfortunately, the current regulations, banking regulations, are too stiff. They were initially created to literally help reduce crimes, money laundering, and fight against terrorism. But terrorists have found different ways to try.
Exactly.
And when you even look at the World Bank data of the almost $3 trillion that are circulating illicitly on a yearly basis, cryptocurrencies in general, not just Bitcoin, account for about $21 billion. So it's not even up to 0.5%. So the vast majority of illicit money is being transacted through cash and through banks. So it's not really preventing what they want you to use it to prevent. But what happens is that, unfortunately, governments are weaponizing it. because it only takes a government informing banks that this citizen is a terrorist for that bank to shut down the account of the person without even telling the person what they did in the first place, because they cannot reveal the reason why the account was shut down. And now you being shut down from one bank leads to you being shut down from all the other banks in the system, lead to somebody sending you money from another bank, even outside of the country, also risking their bank account. So it becomes a chain. And this has been a good way for government to be able to control activists financially and prevent them from raising money. Not just activists, even NGOs. There are countless of governments that have shut down multiple NGOs' bank accounts in Africa. It happened in Senegal, it happened in Togo, Cameroon, Uganda, and many other countries. And all these regimes have the same things in common. They are afraid of freedom.
Yeah, thank you. But how much time it takes for regimes to freeze bank accounts for activists if they announce fundraising campaign? I'm just say to comparison. In Kazakhstan, for example, if someone wants to fundraise for family for political prisoners, it takes 3 to 5 minutes. If you post on Facebook announcement that you want to fundraise for this bank account, it takes literally 3 to 5 minutes to basically terminate your bank account or to freeze it. So how it works in also African countries?
Honestly, I don't have the specific data because these are multiple countries and multiple contexts.
Yeah, but it's just like in general.
In my experience, I think it happened within a couple of hours. It just takes a government official to communicate it to the bank, and you're done.
Yeah, I just wanted to compare the speed of Bitcoin to save life and speed of traditional financial institutions, basically, exclude financially completely or destroy life of activists. So we have now, unfortunately, 2 parallels. So Andrey, I'm coming back to you with a question. So in this crazy time of emergency, can you just say us what's happening right now in Ukraine and how people in this kind of situation can share experience, how they can use Bitcoin for emergency situations, like step by step. So you was on this terrible situation on the first day of Russian invasion. So now, imagine something happened in Europe, some emergency. Luckily not, but something happened. What ordinary citizens can do practically? Because you're a developer, what tools they can use, to organize this fundraising campaign right now to save their family members? Something very practical.
Well, you might have known what happened a few days ago when the dam on Dnieper was completely destroyed, and thousands of people home were flooded by water. So this is not a question of if a question of when. As I have mentioned before, you can do it by yourself without any tools. You can just fire up, say, you use Electrum wallet, copy paste your receiving address and share it with somebody who wants to donate it. If you want it to be a little bit more automated, find a service that provides BTC Pay server. For a small fee or perhaps for free. If you are a developer, you can boot up your own server somewhere in cloud or even at home, as I did for some time. Install this BTC Pay server and accept payments in Bitcoin in minutes, both on chain and Lightning. And it works flawlessly. Then it's less technical, more business procedural questions. How would you report the use of fund to your donors? And just use whatever is most convenient for you. We use regular Google spreadsheets that is viewable by anyone who donated to us with photo proofs, etc. So you can literally do it in minutes to days, and you can help save lives.
Thank you, Farida. How Bitcoin is helping right now, or what kind of instruments activists using right now to deliver humanitarian aid in African countries? What is the most popular way how they operate?
The cases vary from one situation to another, and once again, most African activists who use Bitcoin for their work don't like speaking about it because it's literally telling people the tools you're using to counter them is literally selling yourself out technically. But there are many countries where they're having massive protests against the government, where the government shut down the banks of the movement leaders, and Bitcoin became a way for them to raise funds. The NSAS movement in Nigeria, for example, used Bitcoin massively. At some point, Bitcoin was also used in the resistance movement in Cameroon, in Togo, as well a couple of years ago. So they have in various situations. They are also, unfortunately, we still lack a lot of African-based platforms. So literally, we are using products that are built externally, which is great. But at some point, we would like to see more investment made into platforms on the continent so that we have a little bit more of representation and also ownership in the process.
But are your crypto exchanges providers also exposing data of services? So do you use exchanges, regulated exchanges, or you prefer actually self-hosted wallets? It's just important to understand for developers who are here how they can protect and why it's important to protect, especially activists, and how they can help basically.
For most activists, the priority is privacy. Privacy is literally a matter of life and death in this specific case. For a long time, people have been resorting to peer-to-peer exchange, but due to certain circumstances, it's no longer possible to easily do that. There are platforms, whether they are private wallets, that are giving them those options as of today. There are also new initiatives that are coming up, new projects like Farida, for example, that are going to allow a more private way of sharing money, but then being able to kind of have a group ownership of the fund. So it's going to make fundraising easier. There is still a lot that needs to be done because we have to consider certain difficulties such as lack of access to internet in certain areas and absence of electricity in certain areas. But there are also great projects that are popping up on the continent, like Mashakura, for example, where people are buying Bitcoin using USDT. So there are new alternatives that are coming up to make it easier for everyone to access and to also secure their funds and increase privacy on the transaction. So I'm happy to see those coming. And one of the great aspects of Bitcoin is the fact that the technology also comes with a lot of innovation. And I really can't wait for what it's bringing us in the coming years.
Thank you. Andrey, last question for you, actually. What you, as developer who is using Bitcoin for humanitarian aid, could advise, ask, share with developers, Bitcoiners, how they can help such people like you and, who are doing a lot of things for a cause, how to improve instruments for, fundraising for emergency situations?
Well, first of all, Bitcoin speed is good, but please understand that most of supplies that we buy are their prices are quoted in USD or Euro. So we are forced to sell Bitcoin into stable coins or fiat to provide actually stuff that is needed for people. Bitcoin right now doesn't have a working stablecoin solution, native stablecoin solution, but technology is already here. You can use clean site validation and RGB to implement stablecoins, but it's still not done. And we desperately need it because, once again, if some business would like to sell you only in dollars, you have no other option but to sell Bitcoin, put a downward pressure on its price, and give this business dollars. If there would be a reliable stablecoin option on Bitcoin, I would just offer a stablecoin. And most businesses are ready to at least discuss this subject because they, as you can imagine, they are also fed up with this banking nonsense and ever-increasing regulation and compliance requirements. So please, create more complex second-level solutions that involve smart contracts with technologies that we already do have.
Yeah, thank you. Farida, would you like something to add to this? What developers can do more for human rights?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reality is that developers face in terms of issues and in the West is pretty different from what people are facing in the developing nations, because we have different levels of infrastructure available. Collaboration is very important because you need to collaborate with developers from the global south to really understand some of the complicated cases and what users want in this part of the world, to be able to come up with solutions to solve those issues. So I will push for more collaboration among them, but I will also push for resources that are accessible but not too costly, because people are choosing Bitcoin to be able to reduce the cost on themselves, the financial cost, even the psychological cost of going through the regular banking system, and being able to provide services that are not cheap but then affordable is really important for us in the global south.
Yeah, thank you. Now, of course, on behalf of Building True Change Coalition activists and Bitcoiners, I want to thank also actually FEDI and Stripe developers, because they listen to voice of activists, that they helping us to advocate regulators. And I want to thank also to Human Rights Foundation, who actually brought us all together, help us to create this coalition in Europe, and to build our capacity to defend Bitcoin, defend our financial freedoms. So everyone who is wanting to join our efforts, who want to support us, feel free to contact us just right after panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.